Good afternoon, everybody. And I'd like to welcome you to Creating High Impact Dashboards presented by Vorne Industries. My name's Adam Moran. I'm the VP of Sales for Vorne Industries. I'll be joined by my colleague today, Matthew Medelman. Matthew handles our international sales and a lot of domestic US transactions.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining.
So I'd like to share the format of our WebEx today. We're going to be talking about how we can use data to drive behaviors and create the most effective visualizations on a factory floor. So we're scheduled to go for a half hour today. Of that, though, we're going to have some time for some Q&A at the end of the meeting. With the number of people that we have joined into our meeting today, we're going to be a little bit limited. So unfortunately, you won't be able to use your microphone or your camera. We're going to ask that if you have questions throughout the presentation today, go ahead and type them in the chat window. That's going to be curated by my colleague, Matt. And what Matt's going to go ahead and do is he's going to take those questions, and then in about a half hour, we're going to take the most representative samples and we're going to be addressing them. Rest assured, though, if we don't have a chance to get to your question and the purpose of this meeting, we'll be reaching out via email and phone to answer any questions that you have over the next couple of days. So with that, what I would like to go ahead and do is I would like to get started with our meeting today. And we're going to be talking about creating dashboards. So throughout our program today, we're going to be talking about several themes that are of particular interest when we're creating dashboards. So the first theme we're going to be talking about is scannability. And that's going to be the ability to visually identify important information. So when we create our dashboard, we're going to use the concept of scannability so that we can help our audience get to the information that they need. The next theme that we're going to be talking about is the concept of intent and outcome. So intent and outcome is when we are formatting data in our dashboards, what do we want to achieve with the information? So as we craft the visualization, we're going to be focusing on how do we want to use that information to achieve our goals. And the third main theme of our conversation today is going to be about audience. Who is using the data? Very often, multiple people within the same organization will be using data to achieve their goals. So by understanding who is using the data for what intent, that's going to help us craft a message that's going to be much more actionable. Now, we're going to bring in two top tips today when we're talking about using data and crafting dashboards. The first top tip is what we call normalized versus non-normalized data. Normalized data represents information that natively can be understood based upon the value. For an example, OEE is a percentage, so we can understand if it's good or bad inherently by the value presented. Typically, an OEE score of 85% is going to be considered to be good. Non-normalized data, we can't infer a conclusion based upon the value of the data. As an example, a runtime of 59 minutes might be fantastic at the beginning of a shift, but at the end of a shift, having a cumulative runtime of 59 minutes might not be so great. So therefore, the absolute value of runtime in and of itself, we can't use to determine the quality of that metric. And the next top tip we're going to be talking about is contributions to the whole. How individual components of a metric together create the overall metric, and how we can make those individual components much more actionable. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and jump into our first recommended dashboard. And that recommended dashboard we're going to be looking at is a Pareto chart. Now, Pareto charts are often one of the most common charts that people use and are important to people. When we look at a Pareto chart, we want to look at the intent and outcome and the contributions to the whole. So the contributions to the whole in the format of a Pareto chart are pretty straightforward. By definition, a Pareto chart provides a ranked relationship of all the underlying components. So in this case, we're looking at downtime by reason. So we can see how different reasons relate to each other and how all of the reasons together create our metric of downtime. Now we want to tie this into our intent and outcome. Very often when we talk about Pareto analysis, we're going to be talking about what we call the 80-20 rule, which is 20% of our data represents 80% of the value. So in this case, no operator and jam. Our intent through creating this dashboard is to drive an action of a root cause analysis, identifying what's the root cause for no operator, what's the root cause for jam. By leveraging a Pareto chart, we can instantly have the ability to view data and take an action from it. Now we're going to compare that to our second Pareto chart here, which is our Pareto of downtime at work center. In this case, we can see that almost all of the work centers have very, very similar downtime, cumulative downtime events. And that's going to allow us to understand that we need to be focused on the reasons as opposed to the work center. Now the next page we're going to go ahead and go to is our top 10 largest downtime events. Now, again, we're going to be looking at what we call intent and outcome, but the second thing we're going to be looking at is what we call the data view. So earlier we talked a little bit about the concept of normalized versus non-normalized metrics. When we look at our top 10 largest downtime events here, we are formatting it for an intent of identifying where we need to focus so we can address the underlying causes that cause that downtime event. We want to drive the root cause. We want to drive the root cause analysis. Now, we want to be careful using the data view. Now, we notice here that we're looking at absolute values of downtime. So in this case, we're looking at the sum of last 7 days. And we notice that the top 2 issues that occurred on line 3 and line 1 were significantly larger than the other issues. So that's going to give us the ability, by understanding that this is non-normalized data, that this is going to have an outsized impact on the total set of our downtime information. So thus far, we've been talking about downtime pretty significantly, and that's going to fall into our OEE calculations. Now we're going to be looking at OEE as an overall metric. And specifically, we're going to be looking at our trended OEE by work center. Now, this is going to bring into a new concept, which is our audience, and then also the data view. When we talk about the audience for OEE, as a general rule, we're going to be looking at OEE at a more strategic level. So you'll notice that we've selected a wider date range. We're looking at 30 days of OEE, and we're adding in the trends. So individual days metrics are going to vary over a given time period. But by being able to look at the trend of OEE over a given time period, we can see generally if we are improving or we're not improving. Additionally, having the absolute value of the overall OEE over that time period gives us insight. Since OEE in and of itself is a normalized metric, we can draw conclusions about the value of the normalized metric. I'm going to draw your attention that we are presenting the OEE value in amber or yellow. That's to assign a value to that. It is potentially a warning. You also see that our trends for OEE are both trending in the positive direction. So we've talked about OEE and OEE availability. Now we're going to be taking a quick look at the OEE performance metric. Now OEE performance is typically referred to as speed loss. Speed in and of itself is a metric aggregated up of underlying sections. The individual cycles create our total speed loss. There's a line that the longest journey starts with a single step. So you can envision steps as being cycles. So when we look at this, dashboard, we're going to be looking at the audience and the contributions to the whole. So the audience is who's going to be analyzing our speed loss. Typically, this is going to be more at a production supervisor level or someone that's intimately involved in the operation of a production line that they're analyzing speed. And then when we look at the contributions to the whole, this visualization of a stacked bar chart allows us to visually see the relationship of different types of OEE losses. So that's going to allow us to be looking at the underlying information very accurately. I apologize, I'm going to go to the next slide here. When we talk about the OEE speed loss specifically, and we're talking about the individual cycles, in this case, we're going to be looking at the relationship of our ideal cycle time to our cycle loss time to our small stop loss time. By being able to truly understand the individual contributions of different types of cycle, standard cycles, slow cycles, and small stops, this allows us to visualize where we're having speed loss issues. Again, this allows us to take a much more active view of the information and draw really strong conclusions from it. So thus far, we've talked about OEE availability and performance. We're going to talk about the final component of the raw OEE score, which is OEE quality. Specifically, we're going to be looking at reject by reason code. So one of the things we want to introduce at this point, when we're creating this visualization, is the concept of poka-yoke or mistake proofing. When we look at reasons, we're looking at something that's already occurred. So then when we look at why we're going to be analyzing our rejects, we're going to be looking at two of our underlying themes, which are intent and outcome and contributions to the whole. Contributions to the whole allows us to look at different types of reject losses. And intent and outcome allows us to look at how we can counteract the underlying reject process, because different rejects are created in different ways. By being able to create a visualization, this is going to allow us to do two things. The first thing it's going to allow us to do, it's going to allow us to identify what part of the process that the reject was created in. This will allow us to do a root cause analysis there and identify how we can create a poka-yoke or mistake proof so we no longer create that underlying reject reason. And that's our goal, to drive improvement throughout the organization. So we're going to transition from reject reasons to an overall production report. And when we talk about an overall production report, we want to talk about a couple of different things, the primary one being the audience and the data view. We will often see a tremendous variation in production reports, because when you're creating a production report, the most important thing you need to start with is the strategy of the business. Every company that works out there has a strategy of how they're going to be servicing the marketplace. Creating an effective production report requires selecting the appropriate KPIs to help you identify your performance, not against a theoretical value, but your performance in support of the strategy of your business. So selecting underlying KPIs will help you ensure that you are working to be in harmony with the overall goal of the business. As an example, we have typically what we call a low-cost leader versus a niche producer. They're going to have different KPIs because they're accessing the market in a different way. So they're going to select KPIs that achieve their underlying goal. Now we want to add a second function here, which is what data we're looking at. And you'll notice that we've got both non-normalized and non-normalized metrics. So when we have the normalized metrics of our OEE and our OEE subcomponents, availability, performance, and quality. Because they are normalized metrics, we have the ability to assign a value or a quality to them. We can then present that information in the format of a color. This is going to give us our scannability that we talked about earlier. We can easily identify where we have challenges or where we've been successful based upon the color of the information. This allows us to comprehend and act very, very quickly. This is in contrast to the data that is non-normalized, the in count or total count, good count and reject count, additionally downtime. These are all non-normalized metrics. So we have to understand the values in the context of the report. So when we're looking at the OEE and the subcomponents, we can use the color. When we're looking at the non-normalized metrics, we're going to look at the value. But the overreaching goal of a dashboard like this is to show data and KPIs that align to the goals and strategy of the business. We want to ensure that we're getting the right information so we can drive the right actions to support the business process. So this is a little bit of a longer term report. Now we're going to take a turn to go to a little bit of a shorter term report. And we're going to be looking at an hourly report. So when we look at this report, we're going to be really focused on what we call scannability, which is the ability to identify information very, very quickly using color. So in this case, we're looking at hourly efficiency for a given production line. By color coding our individual hours, we can easily adapt and understand and identify where we're having challenges. So in this case, I'm going to be looking at shift hour 6. Because it's been highlighted in a version of red, I know that we've got some particular challenges there. I'm going to then go in a little bit more in depth and identify what are the underlying issues that are causing us from meeting our goals. So in this case, I'm looking at our metrics. Additionally, I'm going to look at any comments that are applicable to that information. So what that allows us to do is that allows us to be pre-armed with the information. Once we have that information, we're going to invite, challenge, and recommend that people combine that with your Gemba walk. So Gemba, or the place where the value is created, in many instances, customers will use a Gemba walk where they're ensuring they're going to the location. By being pre-armed with knowledge about the current state of affairs, this allows you to be much more effective in a one-on-one instance. We can take the underlying data and ask the team what's going on. We want to make sure we're asking insightful questions based upon reality so that we can work together to identify what's hindering us from achieving our goals. So we've been looking at the hourly level. Now we're going to take it a little bit step back and we're going to look at a weekly view of our data. Our weekly view of our data, we're going to use that scannability function again. The scannability is going to allow us to take a large set of information. In this case, we're looking at 4 different production lines over 1 week, but we're breaking it down at the shift level. So this is going to give us the ability to quickly identify both challenge shifts, but also successful shifts. One of the things we want to keep in mind when we're creating a dashboard visualization is not only the ability to see problems. We always are going to be able to see problems, but we also want the ability to identify success. Leadership requires that we celebrate success in addition to identifying challenges. So in this case, instead of looking at the red, I'm looking at the very, very bright green. I can identify that the shift that occurred on Valentine's Day from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. had an efficiency of 120.1%. This allows me to reach out to the production supervisor or the responsible team and celebrate a win. In addition to celebrating that win, we're also going to be able to identify areas where we can improve. By using the color code, we refer to this as a heat map. What this is going to allow us to do is this is going to allow us to quickly and easily consume a significant amount of data, driving it to actionable information. So we've spent a little bit of time today going over our OEE components, availability, performance, quality, our short-term and long-term reporting. Our ultimate report is what we refer to as our top losses. Top losses uses a little bit of every one of these underlying issues to identify what's truly keeping us from achieving our goals. So when we talk about the themes from this presentation today, we're going to be talking about intent and outcome and contributions to the whole. We use continuous improvement processes to drive waste from our organization with the intent of improving our efficiency and profitability. The top losses visualization of our data allows us to take all of our sources of loss normalized by time. So for example, we can compare apparently dissimilar sources of loss. In this case, we're looking at cycle loss compared to downtime events compared to quality loss. Very often we'll see on cycle loss that, a tenth of a second lost time might not seem like that big of an issue. But when we apply that over 198,000 cycles, that can add up very quickly. But by providing data in this format, what we're going to be able to do here is we're going to be able to look and see the information so that we can see what are our true large issues. In many ways, we don't care about our 60th biggest loss. We will in the future. What we want to make sure is we're working on the right things. We don't want to spend the small stuff. We want to invest in things that we have the ability to change, that will change the results within our organization. Additionally, I want to direct your attention to the trend for those losses because we've got our top 3 losses, but we're already improving on 2 out of the 3. Our top 2 losses, we're actually making improvements on. Our third loss, though, is actually going in the wrong direction. So this allows us to take all of the sources of loss within the organization, boil it down to a few key activities so we can relentlessly pursue that information. So what that's going to do is that's going to allow us to allocate resource efficiently so we can drive improvements within the organization. So I hope you've enjoyed spending some time stepping through our very important dashboards. We want to refer you back to when we're looking at how are we going to turn information into action, we want to keep a couple of key themes. Who's looking at the data? What's the intent of the action from the information? And how can we format the data so that we can quickly and easily get to the most important aspect of the underlying information? We also want to keep in mind our top tips of normalized versus non-normalized metrics, typically percentages versus absolute values, and the ability to understand how different aspects of an underlying challenge or contributions to the whole allow us to create a better insight into what the data is telling us. Now, at this point, we want to go ahead and answer a couple of questions. My colleague Matt has been keeping a track on the questions. So we're going to take some of the most interesting questions and share within the team today. For everyone, we will be having the ability we will email out an overview on our reporting later. We will also be sending you out a link to this presentation. If we don't have a chance to get to your question in purposes of meeting today, we'll go ahead and we will be able to go ahead and send that information. We'll be addressing it directly with you. So with that said, Matt, what questions have come up thus far?
Sure thing. Thanks a lot, Adam. So I've been trying to keep up with answering some of the questions real time in chat, and hopefully most of you have received an answer at this point. But there have been a couple questions posted that I think are great to discuss for the entire team here. So one of the quick general clarifications about the data that we've presented so far on the dashboards is, where is this data actually being stored? So the way that the Vorne Excel productivity display works is that each one of the displays has built-in memory and a database of its own. So this production data that's physically being captured or pulled from your line or from your equipment is actually being stored on the Excel display or the device itself. So what that means is that you do not have to set up any additional cloud storage or any additional servers internally on your network in order for the Vorne system to store this production data. So the next logical question is typically, okay, how much data can a Vorne system hold? The answer to that actually is it depends. We say we have 4 gigs of memory, which can store on average about 1 to 3 years of rolling production data. But with every customer and every production line that we're monitoring, that limit might change depending on how much data you consume within a given shift, for example. Now, the Excel productivity display, the version 2 system, which is what we are showing today, has been out for about 3 years now. And most of our clients are reporting at least 2+ years of rolling production data at this point. So that kind of answers the question to how much historical production data will you have to generate these reports from. Of course, we can go into details about extending the memory or backing up production data or viewing it outside of the Vorne system. I'm more than happy to follow up with personal questions outside of this call for that. Now, proceeding forward, Bobby W asked a couple pertinent questions I want to address. One of the things is that we've been showcasing dashboards that actually showcase the live data from one particular line. However, one of the things that might not have been apparent is that dashboards actually have the ability to aggregate production data over one or all of your production lines within a plant, or potentially across multiple plants at different locations, right? So the asset hierarchy is what Adam's kind of hovering over currently in the presentation. This is what allows you to tell Vorne over which specific lines or which departments in your plant to pull the data from. So in essence, dashboards are highly customizable in that you can curate the data for a particular line or aggregate it to show rolled up or aggregate views across multiple lines within a plant. Now, another question about the data on the dashboard pages. While the data that is being used to generate these reports or these widgets is stored within the Vorne system, you do have the ability to export the raw data into Microsoft Excel, for example. So some of the dashboard reports that we create that are more so in tabular formats might be a very easy way for your team to export the raw data outside of the Vorne system and use it elsewhere outside of Vorne. So for example, to update your ERP system or MES system, for example. So yes, the data is something that is very easily naturally exported into Microsoft Excel, and we can help showcase that feature maybe in a follow-up call personally after. The next thing, can we automate these reports? So one of the things that we didn't quite touch on is the fact that when you create these dashboards, you can save them. So that means that you can always come back to the reports, pulling the most relevant production data. You can also share the reports that you've created so that if you wanted to create a report for your entire organization to use, again, those can be saved and shared, and they are always updated with the most relevant or recent production data. So hopefully that kind of addressed some of the general questions that the group has posed. I will be again following up and curating any additional questions from the chat. And if I didn't address your specific question, I will again be following up personally with you guys as individuals. So if you want to stick around for a little bit more, we might not be presenting, but I will be taking your chats, questions, and following up afterwards. Adam?
Everybody, we want to say thank you very much for attending our presentation today. We intend this to be the first in a series of presentations showcasing both the Vorne Excel productivity appliance, but also generally manufacturing best practices. Over the years, we've had the opportunity to work with thousands of customers in hundreds of industries on every continent except Antarctica. We want to be able to show you what we've learned and share our best practices across all of our customer base. So we invite you to reach out. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover, if there's something you'd like more information on, send us an email. You can send that to sales@vorne.com, or you can send it to the email you have for myself. When you signed up, you got a copy of my email. With that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to close out the rest of the presentation. Matt's going to stick around to answer a few questions. But again, if anyone wants to reach out, we are here to answer. And any questions we did get through, we'll be answering one-on-one in the future. So thanks, everybody.